Let's talk about thinning fruit. Josh here. Today we're going to talk all about why you should thin fruit, how you should do it, and when you should do it. I'm going to walk you through the journey that you need to know so that you can have better tasting fruit, larger fruit, and not damage your tree in the process. So let's start with why. I always like to start with why. So why thin your fruit trees? Well, the first reason is you don't want to break your branches. See this here? This is pretty weighted down. And if I don't do anything, this could actually snap off a primary limb or some of these smaller limbs which are dangling down. So I don't want to do that. Second reason is I don't want small little fruit like this. I want big fruit. I want the size of a baseball for these plums. Okay? And the last reason is because you want it to taste good. The bigger the fruit, the less fruit on the tree, the sweeter they will be. Okay, so we got those three things. You don't want to damage the tree, you want bigger fruit, and you want better tasting fruit. Now, another thing you might want to think about is that if a fruit tree bears very heavily one year, the next year, it might not put out so much fruit, and that's called alternate bearing, right? A heavy year and then a light year. You don't want that. You want consistent fruit year over year. We're going to talk through some of the techniques that you need to know on how to thin your fruit trees. Now this here is a Santa Rosa plum. Okay, it's a very common type of plum. It's an Asian plum. It tastes pretty good. This one's not so good because it's small and it's really unripe. Excuse me. Ugh. So we want big, juicy, ripe fruit. So how do we do this? We have to thin the fruit. Now, before I get into spacing, we need to talk tools, okay? There's a couple different methods that you can use. Commercial growers will actually use a spray to chemically reduce and thin the fruit. Now, I don't like spraying my trees if I don't have to, and we don't have that here, right? I'm in a home orchard, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna utilize some other techniques. Now, one technique you can use is shaking the branch. So we're gonna shake this branch and see what falls. So we heard a couple different fruits falling to the ground there. But the problem is when you shake the tree, you're actually losing some of the largest fruit on the tree. So that's really not the best option. Now, one other technique is you can actually take it and go by hand and just pluck each one off of the tree. Now this is tedious, but it will work. The problem with using your hand is that sometimes you can pull off more than you want to, right? So this might actually start pulling off branches. Maybe you'll be pulling off like 2 when you thought you were going to pull off 1. So it's not really the best way, and sometimes you can actually damage things like pulling off leaves when you really didn't mean to do that. So here's the tool that I recommend, and this is a thin pruning device, right? You've got these small little blades here, and it's very fine tipped, you can see. So you want to use that because this allows you to get in between the fruit and get the exact ones that you want to remove. So when I go through here and I remove this, I can just do that, pops it, nice and easy, and I can really get in and dial into the fruit that I want to thin. Okay, so now we know why we should thin fruit, and we've got a couple different techniques on how to thin fruit. So let's talk about spacing. Okay, now every tree is different. Every type of tree, every individual tree, it grows different. Now for plums, we really want 3 to 5 inches between the fruit. I'm not going to get into other types today. We're just talking plums. Okay, so 3 to 5 inches. You can see here, this is not 3 to 5 inches. Okay, this is a lot of fruit up here. So what we want to do is we want to make it so that along this limb, every 3 to 5 inches, there's a fruit. Okay, and we'll start with, let's start with one that's pretty easy to pull up here. So we've got this one here, and you can see this has quite a heavy set of fruit. So we don't want that much fruit on here. Otherwise, these will all stay small and fruitless. So we're going to cut these off. First, we're going to look for damaged fruit. So we do have a few damaged fruit here. You can see that this one is actually cracked. So we're going to remove that. This one here is cracked. I'm going to use my pruning shears to do that. We're going to look for other ones. We've got one here that's cracked. All right, now we want to get into spacing, okay? Now this spacing between here and there is actually pretty good, but you'll notice I've actually got two, I don't know if you can see it, on that branch there. So I'm going to remove one of them and leave this one and this one here, okay? Now we've got another set of 4 here, pretty close in. So we're just going to remove those as well, like every other one. So I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to remove that. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 fruit, where we actually had 8 fruit before. So that's the spacing. You really want 3 to 5 inches between each fruit, and that'll work out pretty well. We're going to put that back in its place. All right, now here's another thing to remember when you're pruning fruit. You always want to favor fruit that's further in on the limb. And the reason for this is, if you have fruit all on the end of the limb, it's going to weight this down. And that's going to cause more damage, and it's going to be more of a problem later as they get heavier. So what I'm going to do on this one is I'm actually going to remove this one on the end just so it's not weighting it down. And this limb will actually prop up a little bit better in the process. Now the next thing to consider is how much fruit is on one primary support branch. Now this here, we have a ton of fruit. In fact, I'm going to move the camera so you can see just how much fruit there is on this branch. So I don't want that much fruit weighing down that branch, or this whole primary branch can actually split from the tree as the fruit gets heavier and heavier and bigger and bigger. And one day it's going to be windy and then crash, okay? So you have to also think about how much fruit can this main branch hold, okay? So I'm going to thin some of this here just to remove some of the heaviness from that branch. So not only spacing, but also overall load on the branch is very important to take into account. Now here's one last thing to look out for. These are really heavy loaded, and in fact, up at the top, you want to inspect to see, is this branch already damaged? Is there a split at the top? Because this is so much weight. Look at these. These are just loaded with fruit, and they might have already damaged the branch. So you want to inspect the top. If they're not, this is going to need intense thinning, okay? You've got a lot of fruit on here. So what I do is I just sort of go up one side, and I'm going to just thin out as much of this as I can, and then I'm going to go up the other side and get my spacing right, okay? All right, last tip on how to thin. You want to look for the largest fruit on the branch, okay? A large fruit is always a large fruit. Okay, that means that it's gotten a head start on the others. It's going to end up being larger. So what you want to do is you want to favor the larger fruit on the branch. So as I look at this, I look and I see, okay, this is a large one, that's a smaller one. I'm going to thin off the smaller ones when I get a chance versus the larger ones, okay? Like this one's smaller here, so we're going to thin that. We've got a large one there. Okay, so I'm going to always favor the larger fruit. Now, next up is we're going to talk about double fruits. Okay, so double fruit is really where 2 fruit are joined at the same spot. And these can be tricky. In fact, you can actually accidentally pull both fruit when you're trying to do just one. So you really got to be careful when you're pruning to make sure that you're going in and looking exactly where you're cutting. Otherwise, you'll pull both of them off. We've got some more split fruit here. Definitely don't want to keep those. One of the nice things about plums is that the branches are pretty flexible. In fact, you can just grab a branch and start thinning and then lay it right back down where it was without too much worry about damaging it, right? So we're going to go through, we're going to just grab this branch from below, and we're going to thin this out to every 3 to 5 inches. And the last thing that you want to look for, as if I already didn't say the last thing, is you want to look for any bugs, worms, damage from anything else that's like drilling into it, and you can actually see that. So I'm going to show you one real quick. Here's one that was probably damaged a while ago and sort of grew into this misshapen, half-eaten form. You definitely don't want one like that. Another one is where you're going to see a worm growing out of it. So you might actually see something coming out of it. You might see a little blob of sap coming out of a single hole. Those are all things you want to look for as you're thinning, and you want to cut those out as well. So look for bugs. Now, the next type is going to be fruit that has started to mature earlier than all the others. Now you'll notice that this tree has a lot of green fruit. So if you see some purple fruit just out of nowhere, that means that something's probably wrong with it that has gotten into the fruit. So you can actually see that little hole there, a bug's gotten in there, another hole right here, bug's gotten in there. So that's a good sign to look for, are fruit that mature or look the color of the mature fruit way sooner than all the others. So you really want to keep that in mind. Those are ones you're probably going to want to remove, because most of the time, all the fruit matures around the same time on plum trees. So we've talked about why you should thin your fruit trees. We've talked about a couple different tools to use and different methods and how to thin those in terms of spacing and what to remove. So the last thing I want to talk about today is timing, when you should remove the fruit from the tree. Now, you could do this when it's really young, but that actually is not the best time. You want to wait till the fruit reaches about golf ball size. Now, this is for plums, so this is actually just a little bit big, and you can see that I've waited a little too long on some of these because it's weighted down so much. So the timing is all about letting nature do its first round of thinning, and then you'll come in with an additional round. Now, if you wait too late, you're not really doing the tree much of a service, because the fruit will already be smaller, ripening. So you want to get it before it's ripe, but after that first natural fall happens. And I actually showed that in one of my previous videos on my shorts, which is called fruit drop. And fruit drop is the natural tree's thinning that happens early on. Now, those are usually pretty tiny fruit, maybe about this size. So once that initial fruit drop happens, then after that, you're really clear to thin anytime after that. But I like to wait till about golf ball size before I thin, because that's really the best size, and I can see which fruit are going to turn out better anyway. Once they're so small, it's hard to determine which ones are going to be the best fruit. I have a lot more thinning to do here. Another thing to consider is you don't want your fruit trees to get 10, 12, 14 feet tall, because then you're going to have to use a ladder to reach the fruit to thin. So this is actually a little bit taller than I like it, so I might have to grab a ladder to thin this out. This tree did get pruned to about 10 feet, but I really like to keep it to 8 feet. Otherwise, here's the problem. I can't reach those fruit to thin it. So keep your fruit trees small. The best time to thin your fruit trees is in the summer. That reduces the height without giving them enough time to recover with vigorous growth. So if you prune in the winter for height, you're actually going to make the tree bigger the next year. Do your summer pruning to keep the fruit tree small. And check this one out. This looks like a raisin or something. It's been dead on the tree and dried up, but I'm not going to eat that. That doesn't look very good. Another thing to consider about timing is you don't want to wait so long that your limbs are so weighted with fruit that it's actually touching the ground. This is a sign that I've waited too long, because this limb should not be lying on the ground from the weight of the fruit. So let's recap. Today we talked about why you should thin fruit, the different reasons, right? We want big fruit, we don't want small fruit, we want fruit that tastes good, we don't want to break our trees. We talked about the different techniques, shaking the limb, using our hands, using some sort of device, which is what I recommend. We talked a lot about what type of fruit to look for, right? You don't want fruit that's got cracks in it. You don't want fruit that's been eaten by bugs, small fruit. You want to favor the larger fruit. And lastly, we talked about timing. When should you thin your fruit trees? You don't want to wait till the branches are lying on the ground to start thinning your fruit trees, but you don't want to do it so early that you're not going to see which ones are going to turn out anyway. You want to let nature do its thing and go its natural course to do that initial drop, and then you want to come in when they get to about golf ball size on plums. And remember, 3 to 6 inches, it sort of varies based on the size of the plums you're going for. And if you want to learn more about pruning and fruit trees and gardening, follow me, subscribe. Uncle Josh Gardens here. I'm also the plant techie on different social platforms is my handle. So I really appreciate it, and thanks for watching.